Hi guys, welcome back to the Creative Corner. I need my hands for today's video, so hopefully the mic is picking me up. This is our first time doing this clip. Let's hope so. This might be our last April special. Might not. I want to do one more this week, and the week is young, so maybe. However, I also don't know how much time I am going to have to read this week, and I have to read this book, this poetry collection by Matt Mason in order to do that video. So, if I wanted to talk a little bit about something that kept coming up repeatedly in these things that I was in, on my day job, outside of being an author and reviewer, is to be a reporter and a journalist. And I attended in the last month 2 poetry talks, one by Nebraska's former state poet, the one before the current one, Matt Mason, and our current state poet, Joel Rogers. All right, I learned a lot through those. I'm not a natural poet. To me, poetry is, as I've said before on this channel, it's what I write in my journal. It's not something I set out to write and publish. It's just something I write to explore my emotions and stuff, and then sometimes I make collections of them. Why am I playing with this hairpin? Because it was just sitting here and I have yet to figure out what to do with it. But anyway, so in both of those things, both of those talks, both state poets mentioned that when they were younger, they found poetry to be very rigid, and a lot of people that they come across don't write poetry simply because they find it intimidating. And poetry can be intimidating. But there are all sorts of different kinds of poetry out there, and you have to find the kind that you like. Like for me personally, I like haikus and freeform, alright? I like the syllable count of haikus and how it flows, and I really think that's the same reason why I like iambic pentameter, which Shakespeare wrote in. It's got this melody that goes with the... Oh, now I'm blanking on the word. I have a degree in this, guys, I promise, but I blank so much. These things. What are they? Syllables. It has a melody that goes with the syllables, like the way the syllables roll off your tongue in haikus, and iambic pentameter create their own little rhythm, basically. And so they feel kind of nice, rolling off your tongue. And my favorite part of haikus is the challenge. The challenge of writing a poem in that set syllable mindset. And I'm going to double check because when I'm speaking on here, I always forget everything I want to say. So I'm going to double check my counters. But in haikus, it writes in a 5-7-5 structure. So your first line has 5 syllables, your second line has 7 syllables, and your third line has 5 syllables. And the challenge of getting your poem into that format, for me, is fun. I enjoy that. I knew a writer who liked using TikTok to practice. Not TikTok. Who liked using, well, I guess now it's X. It used to be Twitter. When I had it, it was Twitter. I no longer have it. She liked using that to practice because she wanted to try to find a way to say what she had to say in less than 150 characters or whatever it was, alright? Basically, you were given like a sentence, alright? And so she would practice her writing skills and getting her point across that way, because for a lot of us, like me in particular, my natural writing style is called purple prose. Purple prose is a very flowery prose, okay? I'm going to look up the other poses real quick to get my point across. Okay? So, I know people who write in other kind too. But I put a lot of effort into not writing in purple prose, and it's hard because it's my natural one. And now I'm kind of mad at myself because I taught myself so much not to write in it that sometimes now it's hard for me to go back to it. And purple prose is... This is the exact definition. Excessive use of adjectives, adverbs, and metaphors which tends to draw attention to itself rather than the story being told. It often features flowery language, exaggerated comparisons, and elaborate descriptions, making it less effective for conveying meaning. It is great for fantasy. It is great for escapism literature. It is not great if you are trying to get a message across, okay? And I adore purple prose, and I'm a huge fantasy lover, and what the heck was that? I'm hanging around kids that don't talk enough. I am trying to get back into using this because one of the novels I wrote that I want to publish used this, but the book series I'm writing that goes with it does not use this prose. And so I am trying to slowly work it back into the book series and get flowerier and flowerier as I go along. But I kind of fell into, and I think it's called yellow prose. I kind of fell into a yellow prose rut. Yeah. I kind of fell into a yellow prose rut, which is, it focuses more on sentimentality and drama, and so it focuses more on the emotional aspect and the emotionally manipulative language of books. And so instead of just being like, oh, like in my flowery purple prose, I'd be like, As we walked through the dark tunnels, all I could smell was dust, clinging to every inch of every tomb. It was like a snowfall, but stale. So stale that breathing the air was so heavy that my lungs felt like they would combust. Every creak from the stone felt like a tremor through my body. Every time I turned around, I expected to see a skeleton standing right there. But there were no skeletons. There were no bodies. This tomb was empty, devoid of emotion as devoid of emotion as it is of life, plundered by grave robbers and adventure seekers for years and years to come. The big empty caskets made of stone, laid open, devoid of anything. And here I stood in my rustic leather boots, covered in dirt, covered in grime, smelling of the stench of decay, being more of a body than any of the remains left in this building. That would be more of a purple prose, okay? A yellow prose that evokes emotion would focus less on the physical elements and more on the emotional. So my main character in there was telling this via point of view, and I should have wrote that down. I could have used that for an upcoming book. But anyway, she was telling it from a point of view of walking into a tomb, right? An empty tomb. It had been robbed. So in yellow prose, it'd be like, the fog rolled in deep through the tunnel. The wind whistled. I could feel a chill running down my spine. My heart was pounding faster and faster the further we walked down the corridor. As the shadows thickened, so did my worry. What's going to happen to us? Where were all the bodies? Were there adventurers still present? You see how I switched from physical to internal thoughts? That's more of yellow prose, and I do that a lot in my current book series. And I mean, that's not the best example of yellow prose. I'm making this up as we go, okay? But then there's also beige prose. I personally hate beige prose, but there are some people who love it. Beige prose is a writing style defined by simple words, short sentences, and minimal description. It is straight to the point. Honestly, I would define Jurassic Park, the novel, which we are going to review later on, as almost beige prose. There's no elaborate descriptions. There's no effort to really make you feel emotional. It's just telling you, this is the events. This is what happened. Okay, not Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park 2 is what I meant, The Lost World. It's just giving you the details. Beige prose is kind of what journalisms use. And it's kind of. We do tweak it, okay? When I am writing an article for the newspaper, I'm not going to just use short sentences, all right? I'm going to use longer sentences. I'm going to use quotations. I'm going to spread out my paragraphs and make it more engaging for the reader. Visually is what I'm going to do. But the basic premises of getting right to the point is there. And so when it comes to fiction writing, I hate this style. I think it's only good in nonfiction writing. That is me personally. Take it or leave it. Okay? And just as there are different kinds of prose writing, there are different kinds of poetry writing. Okay? And I have several books out here. But when you think of poetry and you think of the traditional intimidating kind of thing, you probably think of things like sonnets. Alright? Like Shakespeare's sonnets. Like this one, alright? This Shakespeare sonnet is number 2. And the first couple sentences you start reading, you're like, oh, okay, I kind of understand what's going on. And then by the middle, your brain just is like, what the heck? I'm shutting off. If you are reading a sonnet or any kind of old poetry and you do not understand it, it is highly recommended to read it out loud. And English teachers will tell you this with any Shakespeare book, honestly, because when you are saying words, your brain comprehends them differently than when you are thinking them, and you actually can understand them better. And so, if you are having a hard time understanding the meaning behind a poem, I do recommend you read it aloud. But like this poem, if you went in and read it right now by yourself, you might get 4 or 5 lines in, maybe 6. I think I got lost at 6. And then you're like, okay, I'm confused. I thought we were talking about an old lady, and now we're talking about lust, and where did this child come from? Okay? But if you read it to yourself, or if you read it out loud to yourself or to someone else, it starts making more sense. So sonnet number 2 says, when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauties filled, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be tattered, weed of small worth held. Then being asked, where all thy beauty lies, where all thy treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes, were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserve thy beauty's use? If thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum up my count, and make my old excuse. Proving his beauty by succession thine, this were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelest it cold. And basically, what I get from that from reading out loud is this old woman is like, it says 40 winters, so she's not even that old. This 40-year-old is being asked, yo, you were pretty at one point. Why you ugly? And she's like, excuse me, I'm old now. I was young. I was lustful. I did have a beautiful life. Now I have this child. It's no less beautiful, my life, that I have this child, but I see in this child who I used to be. In this child, I see my beauty. I see my youth. And this child will go on, and they will have the same process happen to them. And it's just more about a circle of life, a circle of growing old, and being revived by the younger generation, basically, them taking up the mantle. But when I first read it, I was like, what the heck? And it is open for opinion. Like in all literature, there is no right or wrong way to view anything. You could get something completely different out of that poem than I did, alright? It's just literature. It's all open for interpretation. However, another thing we think of when we think of poetry is the rhyme scheme. And so, this is T.S. Eliot. I love T.S. Eliot. And you may think T.S. Eliot is another one of those old white men who wrote poetry that you don't care about. Alright? Well, I find T.S. Eliot to be amusing. They often have these little quips in some of their poetry. And there's a lot of nature involved in it and stuff. But, like, I pulled this one out specifically to talk about the rhyme scheme. It's called Conversation Galante, or Galeante, okay? I'm not going to talk about the meaning of this poem, I'm just going to talk about the rhythm and the rhyme scheme. When we think of poems, we're always like, oh, everything needs to rhyme. This line, this line. First line needs to rhyme with second, third line needs to rhyme with fourth, fifth line needs to rhyme with sixth, but that's not always the thing. There's an ABC rhyme scheme in all poems, okay? And so, for instance, in this one, I'm going to read the poem and then I'm going to write it out to you, okay? Yeah, I'm writing in my book. It's okay. It's okay for me to do that. Keys rhymes with C's. Explain rhymes with insane. Faculty and me don't really rhyme. So that switches our poetry thing here to C and D. That makes a B. Sorry guys, I'm doing calculations as I do this. You madam are humorist, rhymes with twist. So these start with the same rhythm. Absolute rhymes with confute. I think we might be back to our first rhythm. Yep. Alright, so in this case, he has an ABC rhythm that matches in his first stanza and his third stanza, but not in his second stanza. Okay? Stanzas are these little paragraphs. Each thing is a stanza. Okay? These are lines. These are stanzas in a poetry. In this one, I'm going to read the poem first, then we'll break it down. Conversation Galante. I observe our sentimental friend the moon, or possibly fantastic, I confess, and maybe Prester John's balloon, or an old battered lantern hung aloft to light poor travelers to their distress. She then, how you digress, and I then, someone frames upon the keys that exquisite nocturne, with which we explain the night and moonshine music which we seize to body forth our own vacuity. She then does this refer to me. Oh no, it is I who am insane. Oh, he switched that there. You, madam, are the eternal humorist, the eternal enemy of the absolute, giving our vagrant moods the slightest twist, with your air indifferent and imperious, at a stroke our mad poetics to confute. And are we then so serious? So in this first stanza, moon is A. It ends with moon. So that is our A note, okay? Moon does not rhyme with confess, so confess is a B note. But it rhymes with balloon, so A and A. So we have A, B, A. And then nothing rhymes with aloft, so that becomes a C. Distress rhymes with confess, so that's a B. Digress rhymes with distress and confess, so that's a B. So the stanza for the poetry, the rhyming scheme for the first stanza is A, B, A, C, B, B. Okay? But then we switch and keys don't rhyme with explain. Keys become A in here, explain become B. C's rhyme with keys though, so that's A. Vacuity, I might be saying that wrong, is a C because it doesn't rhyme with either of those. But it rhymes with me, with the next one, so that's a C. And insane rhymes with explain, so then this is A, B, A, C, C, B. You see how that's done? And so he switches it up, and he ends it with the same kind of rhyming pattern as the first stanza. And you can do that to make your poems more engaging, okay, if you are a rhymer. I don't rhyme in my poems. Alright? And so that's a breakdown of poetry scheme. And if you ever want to, you can go into a poem and you can map out their rhythm using the ABC method. Alright? It literally maps out their rhythm, alright, for you. Two other things I was going to show you. There are also poems like this one. This is In Passing by Misha Collins in his book Some Things I Still Can't Tell You. Do I think he is a good poet? I don't know. I'm a little biased on this, and I can honestly tell you that. I like Supernatural. My sister got me this book. No, she got me his cookbook. I picked this one up because I wanted to see. I was like, oh my gosh, he's also a writer? Okay? Would the poetry world call him amazing? I don't know. But I do like some of his poems. I feel like they're glances into his life. I think that he writes primarily about his existence, like his own personal experience of being human, and being in the relationships that he's been in. He is currently, I hate that I know all this, okay? I don't like how fangirly I'm coming off, but he is currently divorced from the woman that was his wife in this book, and some of the poems in here now hit different since their divorce than they did before the divorce. Right? Before the divorce, you're like, what is he talking about? After the divorce, you're like, oh, I wonder if that's why they divorced. Okay, that kind of thing. And so, but just to show you a little bit of this, because T.S. Eliot in there was writing about a conversation, and that was one of his more in-the-moment kind of poems. Shakespeare was very flowery, writing about the concept of time and beauty, right? Misha Collins is writing about his loneliness and how a random person tells him not to be lonely anymore. Like, it's that simple, right? Okay, so it's called In Passing. I'm alone in San Francisco, and this morning a man walked past me on a steep hillside sidewalk. I was on Grant Street, my knees pointing downhill. I turned shoulder, front, and sideways to slip past the city shoppers, and in a white Oxford, under the sheath of a shaved scalp, the man climbed toward me. In passing, he said the words, "Don't be lonely, be happy." Not looking back, he just kept walking, up and up toward a cable car. He was speaking to me. I'm sure of it. And I think, like, to him, he just had this realization in that moment. He's like, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't be lonely. I should be happy. All right? But it's just a moment in time is what this is. And some poems are just that. They're moments in time. That's what my poetry is. It's free form, which means no rhyming scheme. It means I can do whatever I want. I don't think we went over that. A free form poem doesn't really have a structure. You can do whatever you want. I do it because even though I love every single writing rule out there, sometimes you need to break the rules a little bit, and writing free-form poetry lets you break them all. And so, do whatever I want in there. And sometimes I wonder if that's why Virginia Woolf wrote Stream of Consciousness. Stream of Consciousness, I'm throwing a lot of terms at you today. I apologize. Stream of Consciousness, which we've talked about before in several videos, because it does come up, and the older I get, the more I actually enjoy it. I hated it the first time I read it. Absolutely hated it. Refused to ever pick up another Virginia Woolf story. And she is known for basically creating Stream of Consciousness. Alright? I mean, I'm sure it existed before her, but all her writing made it, like, mainstream. And Stream of Consciousness is the art of writing exactly what you think in that moment, is the stream of your consciousness. Alright? It's basically throwing out the rules for prose, is what it is. Musings, Volume 1 that I wrote, experiments in that. I myself don't write a lot of stream of consciousness, except in my poetry. My poetry is my stream of consciousness. It's where I break the rules, as I said. I don't read a lot of stream of consciousness, except it's underused in mystery books. Just saying that. I actually like it when the main detective in a mystery novel starts using stream of consciousness, and you get every single layout of what they're thinking as they're going through this place. Like, they might be like, oh, that's a weird placement for that, and then move on, and then they'll be like, why was she wearing a 70s style shirt when she died? Did this lady not, did she not keep up with the trends? And it's just like real thoughts, basically, that circle their mind. And so I do think it's underused in that aspect, alright? This other poem I'm going to read to you is Rhythm. It is more freeform. It is from the book 2 A.M. Thoughts by Mackenzie Campbell. I love this book. I adore this book. Alright? This one is time-stamped as 2:42 p.m. They all have a timestamp on them. Not 2:42, 7:42 p.m. And they all have a timestamp on them. I like the timestamps. I feel like it's like a journal, almost. It is freeform in the way that it doesn't really have a poetic... It doesn't have a rhyming scheme. But freeform does not have to be free of rhythm. Freeform means you can do whatever you want, alright? For instance, this looks different than a lot of our other poems. Short line, long line, shorter line, long line, super short line, medium line, one word, another one word, short line, alright? There's no real scheme to that except for what the author felt. That's what makes it freeform. But if you read it out loud to yourself, And that's what people, I think, also don't always understand about freeform, is that there is still a rhythm. There is still this melody that naturally flows off your tongue when you read it. And I recommend reading poetry aloud. It's fun to say. It feels great. But like this one, if you read it in your brain, you're paying attention to every single punctuation mark. All right, so in your brain you might read, "You make me feel dangerous. Stop," because it's a period. "You dismiss the tiny voice in my head telling me to stop and nudge me to go. Period. You make me do things I never would have if I hadn't met you. Period. You make my day exciting, pause, thrilling, pause, electrifying, period. You make me feel alive." Okay? It feels kind of toned down because a comma in writing means pause and a period means stop, right? It's the end of a sentence. And so in poetry, a comma means take a breath, basically. All right? And so if you read this out loud, it goes, "You make me feel dangerous. You dismiss the tiny voice in my head telling me to stop and nudge me to go. You make me do things I would have if I hadn't met you." Oh, I'm going to reread that because I messed that up. "You make me feel dangerous. You dismiss the tiny voice in my head telling me to stop and nudge me to go. You make me do things I never would have if I hadn't met you. You make every day exciting, thrilling, electrifying. You make me feel alive." And see how that flows differently than just like a history book in your mind? And so there are different kinds of poetry out there. And if you are new to the poetry world, or you think you hate poetry because some English teacher back in freshman year told you to read a bunch of old dead guys' poems and you never related to them, then read something different. Okay, it's hard. Some things you can relate to from hundreds of years ago. That's why there's this thing called the human canon, right? The human canon consists of books that it doesn't matter what time frame they were put in. If you can take it out of that time frame and put it in another one, the story will still affect any human who reads it, right? It still has implications. But there are poems that you read and you go, "I do not care anything about this." Because we don't live in the 1600s, is what it is. Look at some modern poems. Look at some modern poets. Matt Mason, Joel Rogers, Misha Collins, Mackenzie, what was her name? I really liked her when I can't remember. Campbell. An older poet that I still love is Robert Frost. He's more modern than all your old dead people that you learned about. And he writes about nature. All right? And I love nature. Pastoral poems are my favorite. Just saying. All right? And so anyway, that was just a little breakdown of different kinds of poetry. I do encourage you to read something that's poetry this month, since April is National Poetry Month. And I think it's an undervalued art. People look at it as being classical, and sometimes when you look at something being classical, it becomes more historical, and then you get this sense of textbookness to it, and then you just don't like it because it's related to school or something like that, right? And you're like, ew, no. 12-year-old me didn't like that. Why would I like it now? Well, because 12-year-old you didn't understand the concepts being discussed in the time yet, because you were 12. You liked video games and Doritos and Mountain Dew and hanging out with your friends. You didn't care about how the time was going to affect your beauty or whether or not people would see you in the future generation. All right? You didn't care about the beautiful little moment in time where you're discussing with someone if the light outside your window is a moon or a lantern. Like, was T.S. Eliot just hanging out in bed with his girlfriend? And they're like, he's like, "Is that the moon?" And she was like, "No, I think that might be the lantern from down the street." And he's like, "I don't know." And she's like, "Do you really think it's that bright?" Like, it could just be a little conversation, right? These are just little moments. And the little moments are what make up life. They're what make life worth living. They're what reminds us that we're alive. They're just these tiny little situations that we react to. And will they matter in the grand scheme of things? No. It does not matter what type of laundry detergent you use. But to you, specifically, the smell of that laundry detergent can trigger 1,000 memories, alright? And so go back to your poems, Go back to these old things. Give it all a try. Start modern if you really don't like poetry. And then work your way back. I also encourage you to find out who your state poet is. You may not have a state poet. You may have a poet laureate. Okay? A lot of states have a poet laureate. Nebraska has a state poet because our poet laureate is dead and still serving. I don't know, guys. It makes no sense to me. I can fact check this real quick. Someone told me that they thought Nebraska was the only state with that. Is Nebraska the only state with a dead but still serving poet laureate? Yes. Yes. Nebraska is the only U.S. state with a poet laureate who is still officially serving even though the poet is deceased. And our poet laureate is John G. Neihardt, Neihardt. And see, what happened was people back in 1927 loved him so much, they're like, oh, we want him to be our poet laureate. And back then, the term of poet laureate was lifelong, okay? Well, he died in 1973, and the Nebraska legislature decided that they weren't going to revoke his title, they were going to change it, so he would be poet laureate in perpetuality, meaning he can never be removed. And so then Nebraska switched to using state poets, because we still wanted to have a poet that represented us, but ours was dead. And I think part of the reason we have those things is not only cultural, because art is part of our culture as humans, is part of what makes us human, but I also think it kind of goes back to before humans could write. The art of storytelling is older than written language. It was originally orally told, and we talked about this before too in older videos if you've been here for a while, but it was originally oral, and eventually the term bard developed. Yeah, if you play fantasy games, you might be like, oh, I'm a bard. I get to go into battles with people with swords and yell insults at people, and then they're like, oh, my art, and then they fall over dead. That's not what a bard did. But it's kind of what a bard did, but not quite. A bard's purpose was not just entertainment. They're often displayed in stories as being, tavern singers and storytellers. But a bard, and just basically entertaining people while they over a glass of mead, right? But a bard's purpose was tradition. The original bard's purpose was to pass along stories orally. And they are actually the inventors of poetry, because memorizing a textbook is hard, right? Memorizing a 5-stanza poem about a war is a lot easier because of the rhythm and the rhyme and the emotions. And it's not just word, 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 right? And so they would take these stories, these important stories that they deemed important to pass along, legends, mythology, things like that. Some people would even commission bards to write stories about them, and they would turn them into stories, poems, or songs, and then they would entertain people with them by passing them on orally, right? Eventually, we developed written language, and bardcraft became wordsmiths, basically. Any kind of writing is a bard. Any kind of music is a bard, all right? It's the role of communicating with other humans, things that we deem important via entertainment. All right? Shakespeare is often called a bard. The first bard that we know of in English literature, if I can remember right, I may be wrong, this could have changed since the last time I looked it up, is Homer. Homer's Odyssey. Apparently it's getting a movie, by the way. Love that for him. Want that really bad. Freaking love that entire book. Okay? I've listened to the Epic soundtrack so many times, guys. Like, so much. Because I love Odyssey. I love the concept of it. And it's a really long journey that follows a young man all the way through his old age and his quest to get back home, and he's facing gods and monsters and sea storms and all these different things, and it's an epic. Literally, it's an epic. That's what it's called. Okay? But it's called Homer's Odyssey because it actually doesn't have a name. Yeah. That's an unofficial title officially given to him, this story, by literature people. Alright? The term Odyssey comes from the main character's name in the book, Odysseus. And then since Odysseus was on a long journey, they took the word Odysseus, turned it into Odyssey. Odyssey means long journey. Okay? That's where that came from. Homer's Odyssey, we don't actually know if Homer made that story up. Yeah. We know he wrote it down. We don't know Homer's actual real name. We just know Homer. Okay? Like Cher or something. He just signed it Homer. Alright? He wrote the story down. But Homer was a bard. And bards studied under other bards and learned stories orally from other people to pass on. They would be at a tavern, hear a story, and they'd be like, oh, I need to share that. And then they would learn it. And they would go share it. So was Homer the creator of the Odyssey? We don't really know. Okay? That's the short and long of it. He was the first one to write the story down. It's one of the oldest stories we have. And one of the oldest mythological writings we have that is not directly related to religion. You could argue about that. Because Greek mythology is a religion too. Alright, but the way the story was told, it was meant more for entertainment purposes and to teach about the gods and their powers in a way that is fun and to show that man can stand up against nature and, well, in his case, gods, although he does get taken down a peg a few times. But we have that one. Beowulf. I hate Beowulf. Beowulf's another example. I'm going to double check this. Because this is one that I'm not so sure that I have it right. Yeah. We don't know who wrote Beowulf. There is no author. The manuscript was found, and it is believed to have been written in the 8th century by an Anglo-Saxon poet shortly after England's conversion to Christianity. Alright, it is one of the oldest books from the English language ever found. I don't know why humanity decided this story needed to continue existing. I hate this story. I really don't think Beowulf is as cool as everyone who likes the story makes him out to be. I think he's just a guy who got really lucky, is what it is. But we teach it because it is one of the oldest things ever, and he is known, the author is just known as the Beowulf poet, because no one knows who he is. He was probably a bard. For all we know, he could have been Homer. Because we don't know who Homer was. Alright? Because they were so old. This type of writing has been around so long. Poetry has. It was one of our first forms of entertaining and sharing stories. And so there are really old poems, and it's hard to get into some of them. But it is still so important that there are still hundreds of people, thousands of people doing it today. And so I do encourage you, find your state poet or a poet laureate, get a book from them, support them, and then, sorry, a message came through on my phone. I was reading it because you're sideways. I gotta go talk to someone about a Mary Kay thing. I'm leaving Mary Kay, but they're getting their business up and running, and they had a question. But, so, I'm going to leave this here for you guys. I want you guys to go read a poet, read some kind of poem this month. I don't care. It could be a Roses is Red poem, alright? Just go read something, or go write something, and enjoy the fact that we have this month to celebrate this really, really, really old form of human communication. Okay? Love you guys. Bye.